"Play it again," demanded High Classifier Bex Nortal, his 7 eyes trembling with collective anguish. "I still can't process what I'm seeing." The Galactic Classification Authority's emergency session was convened with unprecedented speed. Representatives from 17 space-capable civilizations stood in stunned silence as the hologram replayed the nightmare for the 6th time. In the image, a supposedly mostly harmless species, a human, was locked in mortal combat with a massive ursine predator 4 times its size. The video showed no desperate attempts at escape or panicked movements. Instead, the human's primitive blade flashed with calculated precision as it systematically attacked the beast's vulnerable points. Blood spattered the stones as the human moved with the methodical efficiency of a hunter, not prey. "That's not defense," whispered Ambassador Krell, his chitinous plates clicking nervously. "That's execution." The recording continued its bloody course. The bear, an alpha predator that had dominated its evolutionary niche for millions of years, was systematically dismantled by a creature whose file clearly stated no natural weapons, limited offensive capability. "This classification error could have caused a catastrophic miscalculation," muttered the Creel ambassador of the Draconian Empire, a civilization that had prided itself on its military might until roughly 42 minutes ago. The video ended as usual. The human standing over the fallen predator, covered in blood, but victorious, expressing not triumph, but regret for the need for violence. "How did we miss this?" demanded the Assembly President, his voice modulator on the verge of collapse. "How did mostly harmless things turn into this?" The answer lay in the research mission of xenobiologist ZXR Tox, sent to verify humanity's peculiar classification status just 3 solar rotations ago. The grand tapestry of galactic civilization stretched across 27,000 star systems, woven with threads of advanced technology, endless bureaucracy, and the universal constant of paperwork. Even in the vacuum of space, documentation found ways to multiply. The Galactic Classification Authority, whose acronym GCA sounded suspiciously like the noise most species make when choking on something unpleasant. He had meticulously assessed all known intelligent species based on their threat level, evolutionary advantages, and whether they could be invited to diplomatic events without causing interstellar incidents. Humans occupied a peculiar place in that cosmic file system classified as a Class 3 lethal world, but somehow a subcategory, mostly harmless, with an asterisk. The asterisk referred to a footnote that simply said to see Appendix Q regarding anomalous behavioral patterns and unexplained survival rates. Appendix Q had naturally gone astray during the last bureaucratic restructuring, which coincided with the AGC's annual party. Cosmic coincidences were another universal constant. Xenobiologist ZQR Tox of the Lenticule Science Academy looked at the classification report with his 4 eyes, each displaying varying levels of skepticism. As the foremost expert on the evolutionary biology of high-risk worlds' gravity, ZQR had been sent to this unremarkable blue-green planet to personally verify these anomalies. The Academy called it a prestigious research opportunity. Sequier called it being offered without being offered. Another universal constant. Environmental adaptation complete. "You may now disembark," the ship's AI announced with the glee of someone about to set foot on a planet where gravity feels like being embraced by an overly affectionate gas giant. ZXR's exosuit compensated for Earth's crushing gravity and its hostile atmosphere rich in reactive oxygen, a substance that most civilized planets had the good sense to keep bound in compounds rather than letting it float freely in the air. The landing site had been carefully chosen, remote enough to avoid mass human contact, yet accessible for ZXR's research purposes, the Northern Cascade Range, primeval, wild, and just the kind of place that explained why humans had developed such a baffling resilience. ZXR's initial research suggested that humans voluntarily visited these locations for recreational purposes, a concept that, on his scale of understanding, ranged from inexplicable to utterly insane. 27 minutes into the observation mission, ZXR's team detected an approaching human biosignature. The xenobiologist quickly activated his cloaking field, which rendered him nearly invisible, or would have, had the technology not been developed by the cheapest contractor in the perpetually underfunded Department of Xenobiology. "I can see you, you know," said a voice that ZXR's translator registered as casually amused. "Your cloaking device is making the pine needles behind you bend weird, but it's pretty cool technology." XR deactivated the cloaking with a resigned gesture that was universally interpreted as equipment failure at the worst possible moment. The human was about 10 meters away, wearing what appeared to be primitive survival gear strapped to his back. He wore layers of synthetic and organic fibers in patterns that, according to ZXR's database, were designed to blend in with the environment, camouflage that actually worked. "Earthling," ZXR began, its translator working at full speed to convert his naturally high-pitched vibrations into patterns of human speech. "I am conducting non-invasive observational research. Your planet's classification status requires verification, and I assure you that my presence poses no threat." The human adjusted his shoulder straps and smiled. ZXR's xenobiology database indicated that this facial expression could signify either friendliness or imminent predatory behavior. "So, you're basically a space zoologist trying to see if we're dangerous or not," the human said, more amused than alarmed by the idea of being classified by an extraterrestrial bureaucracy. "I'm Morgan, a mountain guide." "And you're a senior researcher, CTX," the xenobiologist replied, with what in academia was considered dignity. "Zoologist, that's inaccurate. My specialization is evolutionary adaptation to extreme environments, with a particular focus on the development of survival mechanisms in species from hostile planetary conditions." "Space zoologist." Then, Morgan nodded decisively. "And tell me, what's the verdict? Are we dangerous or just weird?" "Confusion would imply uncertainty," ZXR replied with academic precision. "Academia only requires a verification of statistical anomalies regarding your species' survival capabilities. According to your evolutionary profile, you shouldn't be able to thrive in your planet's conditions, and yet you do with surprising success." Morgan chuckled. ZXR's translator indicated that this wasn't a threat, but probably a sign of amusement. "Wait until you see what we do for fun," the human said, approaching with an outstretched limb. He was going to take a solo hike up the mountain, but would be happy to show the place around to an alien scientist. Much more interesting than guiding wealthy tourists who complain about the lack of Wi-Fi. TXR hesitated before extending one of his manipulative limbs. Physical contact with unclassified species was strictly prohibited under protocol, as it was a way to contract exotic diseases or lose limbs. But scientific curiosity trumped caution. The human synthot briefly grasped ZXR's limb, a gesture the database identified as a handshake, even though there was no shaking, and began pulling various primitive tools from its backpack. "I've mapped out a 3-day route that takes you through some of the most ecologically interesting areas in this region," Morgan explained. "I hope your suit can handle a bit of climbing. There's a ridge about 12 miles from here with a view that will either convince you we're worth it as a species or confirm whatever you need for your cosmic business." ZXR's internal recording devices logged everything, annotating the exchange with biochemical readings, behavioral markers, and notes for later analysis. The human displayed none of the typical fear responses expected from primitive species encountering advanced civilizations for the first time. Instead, he showed curiosity, adaptability, and a disconcerting comfort with the unknown. "The lack of alarm at my presence is remarkable," Zezer observed, "from most primitive species. First, calling us primitive is a bit of a stretch coming from someone whose cloaking technology can't handle the refraction of pine needles," Morgan interrupted, smiling again. "And second, you're like the 5th alien species that I stumble across in these mountains. The others were more discreet, but they all have that same wildlife observing vibe. If they were going to invade us, they would have done it decades ago. Instead of wandering around our national parks taking notes, ZQR's sensors recorded what could only be described as the xenobiological equivalent of a broken record. 5th species. Our records indicate that no official contact protocols have been established. Yeah, sure, there's paperwork saying we're pre-contact or whatever bureaucratic term keeps them happy," Morgan said as he assembled what looked like a primitive navigation tool. "But you're not the first, and here's what none of you have understood yet. quick pause on the stream. Before we continue this galactic journey, if you're enjoying this unique sci-fi experience, subscribe to the channel now and, most importantly, hit the notification bell. That way, the YouTube algorithm will make sure you don't miss the upcoming videos with the most mind-blowing science fiction stories you won't find anywhere else. Now then, back to our story. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as the harvester scans pierced the ship's defenses, focusing directly on his neural patterns. For a moment, he thought he heard whispers, ancient, hungry voices, speaking directly into his mind. Cut off all sensor signals, he ordered, shaking off the unsettling feeling. They're using our own scans to infiltrate our systems. Blue Song approached the Admiral, her crystalline form fading as she realized what was happening. They're learning from us. Every second we observe them, they observe us even more deeply. Sir, Rid called, we're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council, emergency session. They demand our immediate return. Of course, Marcus murmured, just as we make first contact with a new threat. 3 days later, the council chamber was in chaos. Representatives from 200 species argued heatedly as holograms showed more outposts disappearing, all near the edges of human-protected space. Blue Song stood at the speaker's podium, his crystalline form steady despite the disorder around him. The evidence is clear, he projected calmly. The Void Harvesters have returned after millennia of dormancy and are attacking colonies and outposts using human-derived technology. Then the solution is obvious, declared Counselor Bex, a tall, slender being representing the ancient Trell Confederation. Humans must retreat to their original sector. Their presence has awakened this threat. Murmurs of approval rippled through the Blue Song form dimmed slightly, but before it could respond, Admiral Marcus stepped forward. Retreat. Marcus's voice cut through the uproar. While the colonies are being consumed, while your people are dying. That is your solution. The evidence speaks for itself, human, Bex retorted coldly. Before your species expanded beyond its limits, the harvesters lay dormant. You created this crisis. We answered a distress call, Marcus replied, as we have 17 times since, and as we will continue to do. Crystalham's hologram appeared beside Blue Song, transmitted from Astra's homeworld. Honorable members of the Council, I have completed the analysis of our ancient archives. The Void Harvesters did not disappear because civilizations remained silent. They disappeared because they were defeated. The chamber fell silent as Crystalham played images from Astra's historical database, ancient battles, mysterious technologies, and ultimately, a coalition of species facing the crystalline darkness. 5,000 years ago, the galaxy faced this same threat, and they didn't hide, they fought together. And what happened to those civilizations afterward? Bex demanded. They collapsed. Their technological level regressed centuries. Sacrifices were made, Crystal Home acknowledged. But they survived. We can say the same if we abandon our outer colonies now, analyze them later. Necessity and practice, Morgan replied with a shrug. In fact, we're born quite defenseless. It takes years to develop good coordination, but if we work at it, we keep improving throughout our lives. This contradicted several established theories about the peaks of physical development in intelligent species. ZXR file. Another priority entry. The weather changed as they ascended. The temperature dropped sharply, and dark clouds accumulated at an alarming rate. CTXR's warning systems began issuing alerts about lightning activity. We should seek shelter, the xenobiologist advised. My sensors indicate a blinding flash. He broke off his sentence, followed by a clap of thunder that temporarily disrupted his audio processors. The rain began to fall with impressive force. Just in time, Morgan shouted above the downpour, seemingly unconcerned by the environmental onslaught. There's a rock up ahead. It's perfect shelter. They ran, or in ZQR's case, he made a clumsy forward advance, to Tintus, the rock formation. Beneath the overhang, they found much-needed respite from the deluge. ZXR's suit immediately began running diagnostics for potential water damage. Your response to environmental hazards is unconventional, ZXR observed, noting that the human's cardiovascular readings indicated excitement, not fear. Morgan was already pulling equipment from a waterproof compartment. Thunderstorms are dangerous, sure, but they're also spectacular. Besides, unexpected challenges are what make the best stories. This perspective, finding beauty in potentially deadly phenomena, added another perplexing detail to CTSR's growing collection of human contradictions. Does your species usually find pleasure in being near danger? The xenobiologist asked. Morgan pondered this as he set up a small heating device that immediately began radiating heat, some more than others, but there is something about facing the raw power of nature that makes us feel alive. It's hard to explain. The storm raged for 47 minutes before dissipating as quickly as it had formed. When they emerged, the landscape had been transformed. Everything glistened with moisture. The colors were more vibrant, the smells more intense. ZXR's atmospheric sensors detected 126 distinct organic compounds that weren't present before the rain. The planet wants to impress you, Morgan said with a grin. With the storm clearing the air and this sunset light, this view is some of the best you can get. They reached the top of a ridge that revealed a breathtaking panoramic vista. Mountains in every direction, valleys carved by ancient glaciers, forests stretching like dark green carpets across the lowlands. The scene triggered unfamiliar subroutines in ZXR's analytical matrix, processes the xenobiologist would likely have classified as aesthetic appreciation in organic beings. Impressive, ZXR acknowledged. Though it's extremely dangerous terrain by conventional habitability standards. That's the point, Morgan said quietly. We didn't just survive here, we sought it out. The challenge somehow makes beauty more valuable. As night approached, the human set up a small camp with an efficiency that betrayed experience, creating what he called a camp. Though to ZXR it was more of a temporary survival outpost in hostile territory. A small fire provided warmth and light while Morgan prepared food using dehydrated nutrients and hot water. Does your species sleep outdoors by choice? ZXR asked, observing the thin fabric structure Morgan had fashioned as a shelter. Not just by choice, we pay good money for it, the human laughed. Although camping technically began out of necessity before becoming recreational, early humans were nomadic, following seasonal animals and plants. Some anthropologists think our brains are still wired for that lifestyle, and perhaps that's why so many of us feel that pull to return to nature. ZXR's data-gathering algorithms flagged that information as top priority. The idea that humans were deliberately seeking out ancestral environmental conditions that had shaped them into a resilient and adaptable species, now defying all conventional classification, suggested cognitive frameworks entirely different from those of most spacefaring civilizations. The morning brought new challenges. The trail narrowed as they climbed higher. Crossing a steep section where a single misstep could result in a considerable gravitational correction, what Morgan casually described as a good fall. Watch where I put my feet, the human instructed, carefully choosing a route across a slope of loose rocks that treacherously slipped underfoot. Arf watched with growing admiration the human's ability to instantly assess load-bearing capacity and the coefficient of friction, using nothing more sophisticated than sight and the pressure sensors in their primitive footwear. Halfway across the exposed section, a rock dislodged beneath ZXR's weight, triggering a small debris avalanche. The xenobiologist frantically thrashed his arms as the balance algorithms failed to compensate for the unstable terrain. With a reaction speed that defied ZR's predictive models, Morgan launched himself backward, one hand gripping an overhanging rock formation and the other clutching Cedar's exosuit, halting the impending fall. Got you, Morgan growled, his muscles visibly tensing beneath the outer layer of clothing. With a remarkable strength-to-mass ratio, the human stabilized both positions before guiding Zisser to a safer spot. Your intervention prevented significant damage, ZXR acknowledged, its internal system still processing emergency protocols. That reaction speed exceeds typical parameters for your species. Morgan shrugged, rubbing his shoulder, where ZXR's scanners detected minor soft tissue damage. Adrenaline. Our bodies prioritize survival over long-term well-being when necessary. I'm going to be sore tomorrow, but for now, the endorphins are blocking out almost all the pain. This elegant biochemical system, suppressing pain until safety was assured, represented another evolutionary advantage that official classification documents hadn't adequately considered. At midday, they reached Loias, which Morgan called the good part, an alpine meadow teeming with breathtaking color diversity, filled with countless flowering plants. Tiny flying creatures carried pollen. Among the petals, while higher up, larger birds glided in smooth spirals, riding the thermals. Your metabolic readings indicate hunger, ZXR observed as Morgan's stomach rumbled. Perfect time for lunch, the human replied, settling onto a sun-warmed rock and pulling food packets from his backpack. Want to try something? I don't know what your digestive system can handle, but trail mix is pretty universal. Tak politely declined, watching Morgan eat a mix of dried fruit, nuts, and processed carbohydrates while taking in the scenery with obvious appreciation. Are you consuming calories while deliberately exposing yourself to predators? The xenobiologist asked, noticing several large birds soaring overhead. Morgan chuckled. They're just hawks looking for rodents up here. Nothing sees humans as prey, at least not normally. That one at least triggered several alerts within ZXR's assessment protocols. One might wonder, ZXR said, how a species can be classified as mostly harmless when it inhabits an environment with multiple predatory threats. Conventional evolutionary theory suggests we would either go extinct or develop better natural weapons. Morgan finished with a touch of humor. We took a third option. We became intelligent. We learned to use tools and to pass on complex ideas across generations. Eventually, we became the apex predator on every continent. TXR's processors struggled to reconcile that claim with the classification data. Yet, your species lacks significant natural defenses, no claws, limited dentition for combat, reduced muscle mass compared to specialized predators, but you do have opposable thumbs, complex language, and an incredible ability to detect patterns, Morgan countered. And on top of that, we have extraordinary stamina and unbearable stubbornness. We were built to hunt by persistence. We don't need to be the strongest if we're the most stubborn. As they resumed their trek, ZXR's data-gathering systems worked at full speed, constantly revising preliminary conclusions about human capabilities. The terrain grew more treacherous, the air thinner. And yet, Morgan maintained a steady pace that belied the surrounding conditions. Late in the afternoon, they reached a narrow passage between enormous rock formations. Morgan stopped and crouched down to examine some markings on the ground that didn't seem significant to ZXR's visual sensors. Music, interesting, the human murmured, gently running his fingers along the indentations in the earth. Pretty recent bear tracks, too. Bear. ZXR asked as its database displayed images of a massive omnivore with worrying physical specifications. Ursus arctos horribilis. Grizzly bear, Morgan confirmed, rising to his feet and scanning the surroundings with renewed intensity. Intelligent, strong, and territorial. Best to be careful around here. This trail is a passage leading to the valley's water source. ZXR's threat assessment matrix immediately raised the alert level. Perhaps it would be wiser to seek an alternate route. My research parameters don't require confronting alpha predators. There's no other safe way down from this ridge, Morgan replied, pulling a small boat from a side pocket. Besides, bears normally avoid humans. Usually, just stay close and make noise. They don't like surprises. This relaxed approach to a potentially lethal encounter registered as either remarkable confidence or alarming recklessness. According to CTXR's behavioral analysis, the xenobiologist activated additional recording subsystems, acknowledging that what happened next would have a significant impact on the classification review. As they descended toward the valley floor, Morgan began making periodic vocalizations, not directed at ZXR, but rather loud comments about the terrain and weather, which, he explained, were to alert the wildlife that they were approaching. The passage narrowed even further until rock walls rose on either side, creating a natural funnel that ZXR's tactical subprocesses immediately flagged as an exceptionally bad position, with very limited escape routes. The human, however, advanced with more caution than concern. Every step carefully placed, every pause dedicated to assessing the surroundings. "You're recording all of this, aren't you?" Morgan asked without turning around, his voice low. "This is the Menden Sentin, music, in mind. Humans don't wander blindly through dangerous environments, we read them." "My observation systems are functioning at full capacity," ZR confirmed, though internally he acknowledged that the human's behavioral patterns had already invalidated 7 different academic theories about species-level risk assessment capabilities. Emerging from the narrow passage into a small clearing beside a rushing river, Morgan stopped abruptly and raised a hand in a gesture that needed no translation: silence, stillness. "We're not alone," the human whispered, his voice barely audible over the constant murmur of the water. ZXR's sensors quickly scanned, detecting a large heat signature partially hidden in the dense vegetation across the clearing. The readings matched the bear category in the database: roughly 400 kilograms of muscle, claws, and fangs, which was now watching them with clear predatory intent. "Don't move," Morgan instructed, slowly removing his backpack from his shoulders. "It's a male grizzly. He was probably displaced from his usual territory by last year's fires." The enormous predator emerged from the vegetation with deliberate slowness, his movements conveying the confidence of one at the top of the evolutionary ladder. His size exceeded the parameters in ZXR's database by about 20%, suggesting he was an exceptional individual, even for his feared species. "When I tell you to run, go back along the trail for about 50 meters. There's a rock formation he can climb," Morgan said, his voice still calm despite the imminent threat. "But not yet. Running triggers his pursuit instinct. Your species doesn't possess the physical capabilities to outrun that predator," ZXR observed, his voice modulating with growing concern. "I don't need to be faster than him," Morgan replied with unsettling calm. "I just need to convince him I'm not worth his time." The bear reared up on its hind legs, reaching nearly 10 feet tall, and let out a roar that forced ZXR's audio receivers to automatically attenuate the sound to prevent damage. It was clearly an intimidating display, and by any rational standard of threat assessment, it worked perfectly. Morgan, defying all survival logic, spoke directly to the imposing predator. "Hey, big guy, you look healthy. Good salmon season, huh?" The casual tone contradicted every survival instinct evolution could have created. "We're just passing through, no need to get territorial." The bear dropped back down on all fours, bobbing its massive head from side to side in what ZXR's database identified as pre-aggressive assessment behavior. It took a step forward, then another. The distance between predator and potential prey shrank with each heavy footstep. "Well, looks like it'll be like that," Morgan muttered, slowly slipping his hand into a side pocket. "Plan B." "So what's Plan B?" ZQR managed to ask, already calculating the structural integrity of his exoskeleton against bare teeth. "It depends on what happens now," Morgan said, pulling a small bottle from his pocket without taking his eyes off the predator, "but I have a feeling it's going to involve a lot of noise and some physical exertion." ZXR's sensors detected Morgan's increased heart rate, a spike in adrenaline production, and rapid pupil dilation, all typical responses of fear. But outwardly, the human remained composed. Controlled movements, no panic.